Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Oh my gosh, I am so excited to tell you guys about today's topic because this is one of my favorite topics ever. I haven't talked about it on my channel yet, but it is one of the things that I am most interested in learning about. I've been interested in for so long, and I'm not really sure why I waited so long to do a video on it because it's definitely one of my most requested, but I am finally getting around to doing it now, and today we are talking about Jonestown. Now, if you don't know what Jonestown is, get ready because seriously, this story is shocking if you've never heard about it, and a lot of younger people don't know about this. But before we get started with the story of Jonestown and Jim Jones, I would like to thank our sponsor for today's video, Audible. So you guys know I love Audible. I clearly talk about it a lot. I've been working with them for a while, but I have been a customer for even longer. I love audiobooks. I've been using them for the longest time. I just absorb the information better. I enjoy books that way, and I pretty much only use audiobooks when I do read. Now this time I want to tell you about a new audiobook that has just come out that I think you guys would be extremely interested in because I am, and I cannot wait to start this one. The case that has really consumed me this year more than anything else, what I've been really interested in is the Golden State Killer case, because earlier this year the Golden State Killer was finally captured and arrested, and it is one of the craziest stories ever if you have not heard of the Golden State Killer. If you're like me and that kind of stuff just intrigues you, you will really like this book because it is an in-depth look at the whole investigation. He started committing crimes in the 70s and it went on for a really long time, and then he never got caught until this last year. For a long time, he was in 3 different areas at 3 different times, and he was known as 3 different, attackers. Like, they didn't connect that it was the same guy, all 3 of them. He was known as the Visalia Ransacker, the original Night Stalker, and the East Area Rapist. Turned out it's the same guy. And the man they finally arrested, Joseph D'Angelo, it was 72 years old before he finally got caught, and guess what? He was a former police officer. Now, this is kind of a follow-up finale book to Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, because that is one of my favorite books. That was my favorite audiobook of the year for sure. And she unfortunately passed away before he was finally caught. She wrote the book before anyone knew who he was. So this is kind of a follow-up final chapter to that for all of us that wanted more at the end of that book. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but it's very, very interesting, and I hope you guys check it out because I definitely will be. You can now listen to Evil Has a Name only on Audible. You can listen at audible.com/evilkendall, or you can text Evil Kendall to 500-500. Again, that's audible.com/evilkendall and Evil Kendall to 500-500. I could seriously talk about the Golden State Killer case forever. Like, I did a whole podcast on it. If you want to check it out below. But anyway, let's get right into our story today about Jonestown, which is another one that I am just fascinated by. So this is James Warren Jones, and he was born on May 13th of 1931 in a rural area of Crete, Indiana. His parents were James Thurman Jones and Lynetta Putnam. Now, economic difficulties during the Great Depression actually forced his family to move to Lynn, which is a very small town, and Jim ended up growing up in a shack without plumbing. Now, people who knew him when he was growing up described him as someone who's just not quite right. Side note, there is another audiobook on this whole story, and they talk a lot about him in that book and how people around him just said he was odd. Like, his reaction to people was odd. He was very scared, almost like people, if you approached him too quickly, he'd kind of freak out, and he was thought people were mad at him all the time. He seemed kind of paranoid for a kid. He was just a little off. And one thing that was very weird about him, he was obsessed with death and killing things, and he really liked to bury things, give them proper burials. It was really hard for Jim growing up. His father was an alcoholic. He didn't have a job when Jim was growing up, so his mother really had to support the family, which is a lot of stress on her. He also claimed that at one point his father was a member of the KKK. And because his mom was working all of the time trying to make money for their family, and his dad was just off drinking, Jim was pretty much on his own a lot of the time, wandering around, and he was kind of free to do whatever he wanted to. He could kind of just get away with wandering the streets, and that's why a lot of people knew of him. He was just kind of this strange wandering boy. Now, one thing that Jim became very passionate about in his life from an early age was racial equality. He wanted to be an advocate for them. He was very concerned about the discrimination that the Black community faced. Lynn was a very small town, and Jim claimed that it had a major lack of sense of community. So one of the things he ended up doing in the town was joining a Pentecostal church, and basically a person in the town invited him to go, like kind of a neighbor type friend that, felt bad for the kid wandering around. So he wanted him to, have a sense of community and brought him to church. And he loved church. It was the first place that he felt like he was home. He felt like people cared about him. And that's, what a church is. It's a community. It's a great sense of community. So after Jim's first time of going to the Pentecostal church, he felt like he was home for one of the first times in his life. I mean, church is a huge sense of community. People are welcoming. People, wanted him to feel part of it so that he would, be part of the church, and he loved it. Jim was very fascinated in the idea of preachers. He often looked up to preachers as like a fatherly figure, like a godly figure. He really, really looked up to them like they had all the answers. So eventually Jim's family got a divorce, and Jim ended up moving with his mother to Richmond, Indiana. In December of 1948, he graduated from Richmond High School with honors, so he was a very good student. And the following year, in 1949, Jim married a woman named Marcelyn Baldwin. She was a nurse, and the two of them ended up moving to Bloomington, Indiana. And he briefly attended the University of Bloomington, and in 1951, he moved to Indianapolis, where he attended night school at Butler University. And he eventually earned a degree in secondary education in 1961, 10 years after enrolling. So he had a degree in education. Now, Jim and his wife ended up having a lot of kids, and they had some of their own, and then some were adopted. They adopted an African-American son, and they named him Jim Jr., and they also had 2 Asian-American children, 1 daughter and 1 son, and then 1 of their own biological children. So the 2 of them, needless to say, were really known for breaking stereotypes. This was not normal back then. Eventually, this would be called a rainbow family, and they were one of the first rainbow families, which is a very disrespectful thing to say, and obviously nowadays it's way more common, but back then it was just so out of the norm that people were, a lot of people were inspired by it, but some people did not like it. In 1951, after graduating college, Jim decided he actually wanted to get more involved in possibly becoming a pastor. So a Methodist district superintendent ended up helping him get started in the Methodist church. In 1952, he became a student pastor at the Somerset Southside Methodist Church, but he later claimed that he left the church because the leaders were not allowing him to invite people of color into the church. He wanted to integrate blacks and whites into the same church, and this was a deal breaker for them, deal breaker for him, so he moved on. So in 1956, Jim organized a religious convention. This was going to take place June 11th to June 15th. And to draw in crowds, Jim felt like he really needed a good religious headliner. So he arranged to have Reverend William Braham attend, and he was actually a healing evangelicist and religious author. And Jim really, really looked up to this guy, like a lot. He would base a lot of what he would do in his life off of him. This guy was seen as like magical, a healer, and Jim really liked the way that other people were looking up to this guy and praising him and, worshiping him almost. And Jim liked that. Jim had kind of a God complex, if you can't tell, or a hero complex, or whatever you want to call it. So following this convention, Jim decided he wanted to launch his own church. The church changed names quite a few times, but they finally settled on the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel. Now what's interesting is Jim was way less about the religious side of things. In fact, a lot of people think he was an atheist. His wife has even been quoted saying that he was. So maybe he just used, religion as a tool, but he was very, very interested in mainly bringing people together and desegregating the races, which is a good thing. He was launching like an interracial mission, and a lot of people were inspired by him, so it didn't take long for him to kind of start racking up a following. People loved that it was encouraging people of all races to come together. There was a lot of people that were really into that movement and wanted to see the world change. He made it well known that hatred would not be tolerated at the church and anyone is welcome. And that was just very, very appealing to people. In 1960, Indianapolis Mayor Charles Boswell appointed Jim as the Director of Human Rights Commission, except for he told him that with a position like this, you should probably keep a low profile. But Jim ignored this. He continued to find new outlets to grow his following, including TV and radio. He basically did anything he could to grow his following as big as possible. Now, Jim did do a lot of great work. He helped racially integrate a lot of churches and restaurants, and he even would set up sting operations to catch restaurants in the act of refusing service to Black people. In 1961, Jim even collapsed, and when he was taken to the hospital, he was accidentally placed in the Black ward. However, when they tried to move him to the white ward, I guess, he refused to go, and instead he stayed there and even helped empty out some of the bed trays, like bedpans, for the people there that weren't getting proper service. He would communicate with American Nazis and then try to get the media to display the letters that they would send him back in return to get people to know how horrible they were. So, I mean, Jim's intentions were good. Things started getting a little crazy after time went on, though. So Jim really hated Indiana. It really didn't align with his progressive values, so he ended up moving to California. He ended up choosing a city called Ukiah, and him and his family moved there, and when he first got there, his family seemed to really like it. But around the 1970s, Jim started to really get into preaching against Christianity. He preached that traditional Christianity was a flyaway religion. He basically said that the Bible was a tool to oppress people and to racially discriminate against people. And within 5 years of moving to California, the People's Temple Church ended up getting a huge boom of people joining, and they opened up 3 different locations. The spring of 1966, they only had 81 members, but 5 years later, there were thousands of members. So Jim really wanted to continue to grow this following as big as he could. His following grew stronger and stronger, and eventually he started doing these cross-city bus tours to visit all of these people and speak to them. He would get old vans, repair them, and as many of his followers that could join him would go with him on these trips around the country. Now, one thing that's super interesting to note about the followers of the church is most of them were Black, actually, and that's pretty unique considering the, leader of it is a white guy from like the country. But this is when he started to act a little sketchy. A lot of older people were joining the church, and Jim started convincing them to sell their homes and donate all the money from their house to the church, and people actually did it. In return, Jim ended up making several houses that the older people could all live in together and be well taken care of. So as you can imagine, when now people are relying on you for everything in their life, this takes a lot of people being involved in all of this stuff. So he had a ton of volunteers, and most people that were volunteering ended up quitting their jobs to dedicate as much as 20 hours a day to the church. Now, at this point, it wasn't technically like volunteer work because they were getting paid. However, the deal was that they would have to give back their paychecks to the church to make it better. And they were given a weekly allowance of $5. Now, I bet you're thinking like, why were people even staying with this guy? Weren't people getting fed up with him, like taking all this stuff from them? No, this actually made people even more loyal to him because they started seeing him as some type of like God, like something above them. He had something about him that was charming and convincing, and people were just hooked on him. Some people even thought he was as powerful as like Jesus, and that he had healing powers and was basically magical. Now, one really weird thing that Jim ended up telling his followers is that everyone but him is homosexual. Yeah, that's right. Every guy is gay and every girl is lesbian except for him. He basically told them that sex was selfish and that none of them should have sex at all because that time and energy should be going back into the church. And then one day at church, Jim decided he wanted to test the loyalty of his following. So he ended up passing out a bunch of punch, and he told people that after they started drinking some of it, that it was poison. So people started freaking out, but said he was testing their loyalty because this was a drill. This was a drill for if the CIA were to attack them. He would rather them all die than be captured by the CIA, in his mind captured. So, people were freaking out. Some people were like taking it because they were loyal and trusted him. But after a little while, he told them that there was no poison in it. He was just testing their loyalty. So Jim had been living in Ukiah for a while, but eventually he decided he wanted to move to San Francisco because it was much bigger, had more people and a bigger following. It's just better for someone who's trying to build up a business or a church, whatever you want to call it. Now, he moved there in 1974, and by this time, the assassinations of Martin Luther King and JFK had already happened, so the country was very fragile and feeling very hopeless and dark. The People's Temple and Jim's followers were convinced that they were going to be restarting the planet, basically, building a way better world. So they weren't worried at all. They were thinking this is all, the storm before the calm, I guess. And after seeing Martin Luther King and John John F. Kennedy get assassinated, I mean, there's a good chance Jim believed in the conspiracy theories, which, I mean, I do believe in both of those theories. I do think they were both assassinated in conspiracy. I have videos on it, and I definitely back that up with a lot of proof for why I think that, but he also probably thought that, and he started to get paranoid that since they were trying to create social change and trying to bring races together and stuff like that, that the government would come after him. And he wasn't nearly as powerful as them, but he still was pretty paranoid about it. As time went on, he started to get more involved in politics. He was really influencing elections, and eventually he started getting threats. He was getting threats from, you know, just people, and then he was also paranoid about the government coming for him. And at this point, Jim was also really paranoid and started taking drugs. He claimed he was having issues with his kidneys, and that's why he was self-medicating. So eventually one of the people that was in the People's Temple decided that the church was going in a wrong direction. And a lot of people are starting to feel this way because Jim was kind of losing his shit a little bit. So she ended up working to get an article published where she kind of, you know, ditched on what was really going on at the church and how Jim was and how she wanted there to be an investigation. Now, once they got wind that this article was going to publish, he randomly got the idea to move everyone and the whole People's Temple Church to its own community in Guyana. So in December of 1975, Jim and 90 other members hopped on a plane and landed near Guyana. And this is where they were going to build their new community. Now this was like in the straight jungle, people. It was like fucking a lot of trees, a lot of green, and they were out in the middle of nowhere, and they were gonna start this like utopian society. That was the idea behind it. Like everyone's happy, kind of hippie village, communist, everyone takes care of each other, everyone's taken care of type of situation. They were fed up with the regulations in the United States, and they just wanted to be free from the government. They felt like the government was really corrupt, so that's basically what he wanted to, was just kind of start his own new world for people. Now, Jim had actually bought this land a little while earlier. He started looking at it quite a while back. This was kind of always part of his plan, but the investigation kind of moved everything along and he jumped ahead and did it. But it was acres and acres of land, so now you kind of can see where the money is coming from. After the first people went down there, they sent back videos to the other People's Temple members, showing them how great it was and how they had everything set up and everyone should come join them. They showed how everyone had freedom and there was total acceptance and nothing to be worried about there. So as many as 500 people ended up going over there in the beginning to start building it and setting it all up. Jonesville was kind of known as a socialist paradise, and people who knew of people that were going there and moving to Guyana to live there kind of just thought they were brainwashed by him, which, you know, a lot of them were, but a lot of them really did have good intentions. They wanted a better world. They just weren't following the right person. And I'll tell you why. Eventually, though, rumors were getting out that Jim was brainwashing members into thinking they had to stay by basically blackmailing them, by saying that they did illegal things and he knew about it and he would tell police if they ever tried to leave. So eventually the population of Jonestown grew to slightly under 900 people. And that was kind of at its peak around 1978. And after a ton of people came over there, it ended up getting overcrowded. But Jonestown had everything that you could possibly need. They had a medical clinic, daycare, stores, and restaurants. Jim was basically able to provide people with food, shelter, clothing, and anything else they needed. But anyone that was a member of Jonestown and lived there permanently was a full-time employee of Jim, and he basically owned them. And people were working crazy hours for Jim. He basically convinced people that the more they worked, the better their life was gonna be, and the better the church would be for future generations and for the world, that they were saving the world. They thought they were part of something bigger than themselves. People would start to feel guilty if they took too many breaks or slept too long because they were afraid they were gonna disappoint Jim. As time went on, the whole mood around Jonestown started to go downhill. A lot of people were wanting to leave but were afraid to leave. Jim was angry and seemed hostile at them sometimes. When he wasn't there, the mood would be a lot lighter. People would be dancing, having fun, playing games. But when he was around, it was, you know, all work. Jim would also give them these big punishments if things didn't go his way or if people broke his rules. Some of the rules were having sexual interaction with each other or leaving the group and going off and doing your own thing. So like ridiculous controlling rules. And sometimes he would even punish people for doing things in front of everyone else, like a public, you know, shaming ceremony. And sometimes he would even spank people, hit them, beat them. However, most of the people in the church were brainwashed into thinking that this was normal and just part of bettering the church. Now, there's probably a lot more cases of this happening, but eventually Jim was caught raping a woman on a bus. But he claimed he was doing it for her. It was all for her. In fall of 1977, an ex-Temple member named Tim Stone actually created a group called Concerned Relatives Group. And it was basically a group effort to try to help people whose family were still over there brainwashed and to bring the truth to Congress and government officials about what was really going on in the church and in people's temple. They asked for an investigation, and Tim ended up going all the way to Washington, D.C. to ask for one himself. While he was trying to get an investigation into it and get some help, Jim started becoming even more paranoid at this time. Jim was likely using drugs, and he became very frantic all the time. He became very worried about everything. Members said that he was very uptight. It even got to the point where his speech was starting to slur and he couldn't talk very well. So everyone there was really concerned about him. If anyone ever tried to leave Jonestown, it would send him into a full depression. He had all these issues with separation and thought that everyone that was leaving was a traitor and trying to abandon him. But after that paper that I mentioned was finally published, after, he was already set up in Guyana, California Congressman Ryan decided that he wanted to go ahead and see for himself what was really going on. So in November of 1978, he flew down to visit Jonestown. Now, once word got to Jonestown that he was coming to visit, guess who was freaking out? Jim. Jim started to go through all these different scenarios of what could happen and deciding whether he was going to let the congressman in or not. At one point, he even talked about killing the congressman and everyone else that came. But Congressman Ryan, relatives of the Temple members, an NBC camera crew, and reporters for various newspapers all flew to Georgetown on November 15th, and 2 days later, they traveled by another airplane and were transported to Jonestown. The night that he arrived, Jim actually planned like a ceremony to welcome him, and it was pretty lit. They had dancers and everyone was in a great mood, and he convinced everyone to act really, really happy so that the congressman would not, get a hint that anyone was upset there.
I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about questions that have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
However, while the party was going on, a lot of the members that were very desperate to get out of there were slipping notes to the camera crew and to the congressman about how unhappy they were and how they needed help getting out of Jonestown. So that's when Congressman Ryan realized that this was a real problem, that something bad was going on here, and it was not all fun and games like they were acting like it was.
They confront Jones.
Last night, someone came and passed me this note.
Well, that's who we're talking about. He wants to leave his son here. If Jonestown's such a bad place, why does he want to leave his son here?
Doesn't it concern you, though, that this man, for whatever reason, one of the people in your group...
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here.
Then the following day, people continued to tell reporters about how they were desperate to get out of there.
This is your wish today? So go back home. And where's home? U.S.
You bring those kids back here! Hold on. You bring them back!
One second.
Don't you touch my kids!
He insisted that Jonestown wasn't holding anyone captive and anyone could leave, and whoever was saying that was just trying to get attention. But during that afternoon, a member of the People's Temple actually came up to Congressman Ryan with a knife and tried to attack him. Now at this point, his security was like, we're out of here. He needs to go, so he left. But as he was leaving, he was seen with blood stains on his shirt from the attack. Everything was being broadcasted, so when people saw him with blood on his shirt back at home, people freaked out. He was supposed to go down there and check and make sure everything was safe, but when they're seeing him with blood on him, they're like, okay, clearly something bad is going on there. When it was time for Ryan and his crew to leave, he was escorted by some of the church members back to his plane. However, once they got to the landing strip, some of the members of the church started shooting them, open fire right at them. Congressman Ryan, along with NBC reporter Don Harris, NBC cameraman Bob Brown, San Francisco Examiner photographer Greg Robinson, and a Temple member, all ended up dying from their gunshot wounds.
I hit the deck, I lie face down. I have my arm over my head, basically, as though you go to sleep with a baby, One arm, my right arm was on my head like this, my left hand was this, and my face is pushed against, kissing the floor as close as possible. I don't want to move because I know they keep shooting. And next thing I heard, they walking towards us, one of the men. And somehow, one shot hit Bob Brown in the leg, I believe. I don't know what part of the body. He screamed, ouch! And of course, shit or something, I don't know what he did. And next thing I know, the guy came close and blew his brain off. And next thing I know, I say, oh, next one be me who get killed, right? So I just didn't think about it. I just think about my little daughter. The next thing I know, I have tremendous pressure, explosion right next to my head, and my arm just feel like falling apart. But I won't dare to move one single muscle. That saved my life. I guess the real save my life is because my arms is ahead of my head. So the bullet missed the brain when it hit my arm instead, and I didn't move, and the blood is all over the place. So they thought I probably dead.
The bodies were flown back to the United States amid rumors that Jones was organizing a mass suicide ritual at his farming commune.
Now, once the word got back to Jim about what was going on, he realized he was gonna get in trouble for everything. And, especially once people back at home figured out they were gonna come for him. People were starting to rebel and trying to leave Jonestown. So in a last-ditch effort to keep everyone there, he made a huge speech saying that the congressman had been shot. He then started scaring them. He started saying that the government was coming after them and they would kill them all, torture their kids. People were freaked out. And so Jim told them that the only way to save themselves was by revolutionary suicide. So he ended up making cyanide-laced grape Kool-Aid and serving it to everyone there. He said, if we can't live in peace, then we must die in peace. He said this was the only way and there was nothing else they could do, but one of the People's Church members stood up and tried to convince him that dying wasn't the only way. She started begging, saying that she wanted her children to live and that she couldn't stand seeing them go through this and she needed to get out of Jonestown. She just wanted to leave. And at this point, she was shot by guards. So this is when other people realized that there was no choice and started drinking the Kool-Aid. Now, that is actually a phrase you've probably heard, drinking the Kool-Aid. When someone's like believing BS, people be like, oh, it sounds like you're drinking the Kool-Aid. And this is what that quote is from. So many of the people drank it. Some of them were forcibly injected with it or forced to drink it or beaten or killed other ways. So people who drank the Kool-Aid started dropping left and right. They were convincing people to give this to their children, that it was the best way. So mothers started giving it to their babies, to their children. They all started dying. So many people died. And at the end of all of this, Jim shot himself. A total of 909 People's Temple members died that day in Jonestown. There was only 5 people who escaped into the jungle. It was very rare, but some people did escape. But one thing that was found in Jonestown was a note that read, "To whoever finds this note, collect all the tapes, all the writing, all the history, the story of this movement, of the action, must be examined over and over. We did not want this kind of ending. We wanted to live, to shine, to bring light to a world that was dying for a little bit of love. There's quiet as we leave this world. The sky is gray. People filed by us slowly and take the somewhat bitter drink. Many more must drink. A teeny kitten sits next to us watching. A dog barks. A bird gathers on the telephone wires. Let all the stories of the People's Temple be told. If nobody understands, it matters not. I'm ready to die now. Darkness settles over Jonestown on its last day on earth." So very, very freaky story. Obviously, when people in America were finding out about this, the coverage of it was brutal. People could not believe that this happened and that many people died. I mean, a lot of people don't even know about this. So it is one of the craziest stories out there, man. And it definitely shows us the danger of people creating their own religions and cults and what can happen. I mean, look at Scientology. It's pretty crazy stuff going on in that. Imagine if Jonestown got to that level one day. Jim's son, Jim Jr., had a very, tumultuous time after this, trying to deal with, what happened with his dad and why he did all of this. So it was very hard on him. And overall, this just shocked people. But I really want to know what you guys think of this story. What do you think of Jim? What do you think of his intentions? How much were his intentions about controlling people and how much was it about actually helping the world? It's kind of like one of those things where I think maybe in the beginning he was more focused on helping the world, and then over time the power just got to him and he became totally into himself and power hungry. I can't imagine telling that many people to kill themselves. The selfishness, the arrogance, I mean, truly incredible story. But I would love to know your guys' thoughts on this. Definitely let me know below. But that's it for me today, guys. Be safe, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Leslie lost most of her family in the godforsaken forest of Jonestown.
This is a final goodbye. This is a final goodbye to say that I recognize you, I know you, I love you, and you know, you're always in my heart.
She's now finally able to lay to rest the ghosts of the past.
Thank you. So grateful for you. It's almost 40 years now.